Welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 180. The topic is, when AI agents take the lead, who do they become? Our guest today is Frances Zelazny, Identity, with years of experience in biometrics. Welcome, Frances.
Thank you for having me.
And before we actually dive into the topic today, Frances, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your background and career trajectory. How did you happen to become an Identity?
So I got involved with facial recognition before anybody even knew what it was. I was number 18 at a little startup called Visionics, which was one of the pioneers of this technology. And I helped grow that company into what is today known as Idemia over a 13-year stint. And I had the fortune to see how the technology evolved and got implemented into foundational programs that we take for granted today, like global entry, pre-check, even Touch ID. That really formed and shaped a lot of my thinking around biometrics and identity and the possibilities that exist in terms of applying these technologies into private sector and today into, consumer and in the world of AI. I also spent a lot of time with multilateral institutions focused on promoting biometrics and identity for social and economic development. I did work overseas and also with the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank and the Center for Global Development. I got involved with payments and fraud. I spent time as CMO of BioCatch. For those who may know, BioCatch is a fraud prevention company using behavioral biometrics. And I had recently started my own company called Anonybit, where we were focused on privacy preserving biometrics. So I've really seen this technology from all different angles, like I said. And I think that we are entering a whole new world now with AI agents. And honestly, that's what keeps me here because it's ever evolving, it's super interesting, and it touches on every aspect of our life.
So you actually pivoted perfectly back into the topic today. And it seems like every other episode we talk about agentic AI and the implications. And so I just want to start maybe with a baseline sort of question from your perspective. What are the security implications of an AI agent acting on behalf of a person or potentially on behalf of more than one person?
So I think it's important to, take a step back and say, like, what is an agent? Some people say, well, it's just a bot. And the way I distinguish it, I say a bot has a task and it has to it has to do the task. And if it runs into problems, it just spins in place or maybe just crashes and that's the end of it. Obviously, there are good bots and bad bots, good bots and bad bots, but essentially it's the same. They're just driven to complete a task and that's it. Agents, on the other hand, are designed to complete a mission. And that's a huge difference because when you're on a mission, you don't really care how you get there. You just want to complete the mission. And agents are smart enough to figure out how to pivot and change direction as they need in order to complete that mission. And that could mean tapping into databases. That could mean changing function. That could mean maybe even creating another agent. So if you understand that difference, then the security implications and the security questions and when and how an agent acts on your behalf become much more apparent. So the questions are, is the agent acting on behalf of the right person? Does the agent hallucinate along the way and make stuff up and go up on a tangent that was not intended? Is there a
Um,
risk that the agent gets taken over, hijacked? Is there a risk that the agent is authorized by the right person, but then taps into the wrong database? So there are tons and tons of these questions that come up. And my biggest concern is that, and we spoke about this earlier, is that we don't really have strong identity foundations as it is. And now you're adding on top these autonomous agents. It's really scary.
so a lot of the challenges I feel come with the idea of delegation. Um, that it's not just the agent that's actually I'm worried about. It's the agent is talking to maybe an MCP server, which is calling APIs, and there's this whole downstream effect of we want the security policies to be as close as possible to the data, but the data and the human are fairly disconnected. And it's hard to understand. I think sometimes this comes down to understanding what's the intent of the human. And so I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how are we going to possibly convey the intent of the human all the way downstream um, from the agent to sub agents and other pieces of infrastructure that might be handling some of this request?
Yeah, so I mean, that's really the challenge. A lot of people talk about know your agent and a lot of people talk about, intent and delegation and all that kind of stuff, but I really have not seen this being implemented in any real, like, production scale environment. And part of it just goes back to what I said, because we're sitting on weak foundations and you can't solve this if you don't solve the core identity problem. So how do you establish intent, and how do you make sure that that gets carried through for the life cycle of the agent? So
Um,
I think one very fundamental way is to get rid of passwords and pins and OTPs and other weak credentials and authenticators that can be used by somebody else, and bind a biometric to the agent in a way that can be asserted through the life cycle of the agent. So whether it's done through a token or something else, it's not just about knowing that the agent is registered, but it's really about at the time that the agent is created or let loose or whatever the word is, there is a human in the loop that authorizes via strong authentication the activity of that agent and signs off in a cryptographic digital form what that agent is supposed to be doing. If you bind that signature, if you will, to the agent and have that carry through the life cycle of the agent, you will be able to tell later on if the assertion has been tampered with. And you will also be able to do much better handoffs between different systems and the credentialing systems that are controlling them. This doesn't solve for every problem every security issue with agents, but it does solve for the identity intent issue.
I wonder if it's more existential than that. I'm preparing for a talk that I'm doing at the MCP Dev Summit, and I've been looking into this like old story from late antiquity, from the third to the sixth century, of the idea that what became the story of the golem in sort of Jewish, I would call it mythology, I guess. But it actually, the story originates from 300 to 600 CE, in this idea that you could take the seal of God, which is truth, and you could somehow instantiate an agent. Um, and it's
That's
quite
actually a
interesting.
good analogy with the golem, actually, because you're like creating this thing out of clay, and then it just kind of takes a life of its own.
Yeah, but it doesn't have a soul. And I think this is
Neither
one of
does AI agents.
the issues of that we're facing is that they put the seal of God, which is the word emet or truth, onto the golem, and the golem comes to life, but the golem doesn't have a soul. Um, and it turns out that truth is very hard to determine. That the golem becomes unwieldy, or unpredictable or unstable, because without a soul, even though it's stamped with truth, it somehow lacks what it takes to really be a stable part of our society. So I wonder if this, so we say, oh, the intent, I have the intent, I cryptographically bind it to the biometrics of the human. So I can tell that the human did, in fact, give me this truth, but then interpreting the truth, what is maybe not as easy as it sounds. And I feel like, you know, 2000 years ago they figured this out. That but I'm just curious, if you think that, what are your thoughts around how do we express that intent, and is it possible, how do we know that just because I express the intent, that my AI agent is going to carry that truth forward? It sounds very challenging to me.
It is, but you got to separate it out. By the way, this thing with the golem is going to be my next blog topic. You just inspired me. But it really, you have to separate the, you got authentication, and let's say you've got authorization and intent, and then you've got, and then you've got like the integrity of the agent itself. And I think if you separate it out into like these three streams, you can come to a solution. The problem is, and I'm just going to keep on saying this again and again and again, is that the agents are operating on top of existing systems that are not designed for this. So even without agents, look at the level of fraud and the risk and account takeovers and insider threats and all of the, all of the challenges that we see in the cyber world today. And the agents are just automating all of those things at scale, at the speed of lightning. So before you can deal with the agents, you have to, we were talking about orchestration before, we were talking about like, other identity systems. Those systems have to be hardened, and then you add the agents on top. But today we're just rushing because we have this shiny new object and we're not really taking care of the core. So if we really wanted to address it, we have to move away from passwords. Everybody knows passwords are bad, but when you go do your talk, ask the room how many people still use passwords at least 5 times a day. And I guarantee you 100% of the room is going to raise their hand. And we all know this is a terrible thing. But why are the institutions that are implementing these systems not changing?
Shout out to
And
Dashlane. I of course also, as CEO of Blue, I have a number of passwords. I don't know, hundreds of them probably. And I used to have a file, that I used, pretty low tech, but I recently switched to Dashlane, because the one thing I like about Dashlane is when I instantiated my password vault in Dashlane, I used a FIDO token to
yep,
do that. So a lot of the password vaults themselves have a password, a master password. Um, so I feel like passwords aren't going to go away, but at least I have control of my passwords now with a non-phishable, credential, cryptographically strong credential. By the way, it's two factors, because it it prompts me for a PIN number. But that actually must, like a smart card, it's something that must be unlocked locally. I'm not using my biometric. I have a biometric token, but I'm not using that. I'm using my regular one, or my non-biometric one. Anyway, um, I think that's true, but I sort of just say, let's assume we can solve the authentication piece, because the truth is like the one thing we're good at actually is we're pretty good at authenticating humans these days. Like I feel like it's not a solved problem, but it's pretty close to that. Like we're way ahead of authentic. We've probably had 1,000 startups, all addressing how to authenticate humans already. So I feel like that's a pretty well thought of problem. If we just say, I assume we authenticated the human, I feel like we can't go to the next step. So we know we have this human who's starting at the loop. I feel like we don't really have a way to issue the artifacts that we can present as truth into the ecosystem, and we don't have a good way to make policies about those artifacts, and we don't know how we can audit. You mentioned insider risk. Third party risk is actually greater for most companies today than insider risk. Um, and
But it's
so
all
AI,
of it. I mean, I was just giving, right? It's all of it. It's insider risk, third party risk, supply chain risk.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, some of the worst attacks have been supply chain, which is third parties who get access to your systems, to your APIs,
yeah, of
or
course.
using agents to call your company's APIs. So this is really the challenge. Um, but it doesn't seem to me at the CDO or CISO level that companies are really serious about addressing this. And most CEOs I talk to, they don't really know that much about security. You know, they're a bit more normally business guys who know the markets, and they know how to manage large groups of corporate executives, but they don't know security. Like, what do you think? How do we fix this if we can't put it in a language and get the CEO to understand what the problem is?
Yeah, so I'm actually writing a book, and this is the premise of the book is that, we need C-level, we need board members to, really take this seriously because it's a threat that, is affecting, it's affecting the fabric of society. Um, I think that first and foremost is for people to stop thinking about this as a cost center and really understand that this is part of the business today. It's part of acquiring and keeping customers. It's part of maintaining reputation, and it's also growth. So I'm on a couple of private chat in a bunch of private chat rooms with
Slack,
fraud
for
fighters.
example.
Sorry,
Slack channels, for example.
Slack channels, WhatsApp groups with fraud fighters and security people. And there was really recently a data breach in the industry, and people were literally saying, like, does anybody know of another vendor? Because, these guys are getting bad press and we don't want to get caught up with it. So one of my mantras is that institutions that don't protect their customers and their employees will not have customers, and employees will not want to work there. So this is an imperative that that I think is starting to get more recognized because the problem is so out of hand that it honestly can't even be ignored anymore. And it's not just about passwords, right? Like, think about scammers, think about help desk infiltrations. So, passwords is just one aspect of it. But anything that can be phished, stolen, used by somebody else in another capacity is where the fraudster is going to go. So, yes, you might have a FIDO passkey on one device, but if I can call the help desk and convince them because I have all your information that I got off the dark web, I don't need your phone and I don't need your passkey.
Yeah, the humans are always the weak link, and you're only as strong as your weakest credential, or credential recovery strategy, I should say.
Yep.
Um, So, recently I saw a video produced by the Wall Street Journal, um, and it showed that they put in a vending machine into the journalist's like lounge area, I guess, and they had a chat interface. So this was Anthropic's vending machine experiment, and they had a chat interface where the journalist could interact with the vending machine, and so basically the vending machine ended up losing its money in the two iterations that they tried. First, the journalist convinced it that it was a communist vending machine, and then they convinced it that its goal was to make the employees happy, and that was written in the charter. And they presented a fake charter, um, and they convinced it that it was illogical to charge it money. They also got it to order like a stun gun, live fish, and a PlayStation. So basically, the experiment went totally wrong. And I'll point out that I work out of WeWork, and at WeWork, actually, there's a vending there's an honor system like vending machine there at
Yeah,
everyone, and they never lose money. It's always fine, run by humans. Um, but I think one of my questions about AI agents is the vending machine has a really big scope, right? Like profitably run a business of stuff that you can sell from this box. That's actually a pretty wide scope. So I'm wondering, is the challenge part of the challenge that we're trying to scope the responsibilities of these agents like too wide? And to adjust for that, what do you think the types of jobs are that agents will do, or what's the sweet spot for agentic right now? If you're a company that wants to put agentic to use, like how do you like the board level imperative is don't fall behind on AI. I think they're
right.
getting that message. Um, but how do you do that securely? And is that related to this? What's the right scope for agents these days?
So I spend most of my time with banks and fintechs, where the imagination is really around commerce and payments. But obviously, there's many other roles for agents like customer service, reporting, all kinds of. So the possibilities are endless, and I think that's what makes it so exciting because everybody is like, the power of the imagination. If you can imagine it, you can build it. You can, it's really literally. I mean, I even vibe coded an app the other day.
Mhm.
So, like, and if I can do it, anybody could do it. So I think that, that's what's so exciting is that we're, putting things that were completely out of reach in the hands of a lot of people. And obviously that's, the rub is as well. So in payments and financial services, the imagination is around like conversational commerce. So I'm working with a company right now that has a technology that allows you to, let's say, sit in a noisy casino floor and you like somewhere and you want a drink, and instead of like going across to the bar, you can just go on your phone and talk to an agent and order the drink. So I could say I want a gin and tonic, and the agent will say what kind of gin, and then I'll say whatever I say, and then it might respond, no, we don't have this kind, we only have another kind. And now I'm having this whole conversation with the agent on what kind of gin I want and my drink and where I'm sitting and where to find me. And then it says, okay, great, now I'm going to, you want me to just charge your credit card or do you want something else? And then I'll say, no, you can charge it to my room. So now the agent needs to know that it's me. They need to know what room I'm in, which is a reservation system. And then they need to know that the credit card that's attached it's all valid. And they need to know what's in inventory on the gin. So these are all the systems that the agent touches. And, that's what is so amazing. That something like this could actually happen. And it's happening every day, these kinds of transactions. So that's what's so cool. And I think where people get, particularly in financial services and payments, get really, really excited. Because now you're like facilitating user experiences, driving growth, and then creating personalized offers in a way that simply could not be done before.
I want to show a picture. So in episode 174, about 666 episodes back, we had a guest, Ashay Rout, and he's a engineer on the identity and security team from Amazon Retail. So not AWS, but actually the retail side
Yeah.
of their business. Um, and let me see if I can find this graph or this. So um, it's hard to see. Let me see if I can go in, but basically each of those little dots is a microservice. Um, and they basically have this vast, all these microservices connected to each other, each doing distinct jobs. They call
Yeah.
this their SOA, software-oriented architecture, I guess. Um, so the scenario that you mentioned is actually typical where the human is interacting with the organization really. I'm talking to the casino. I would like to buy a beverage, but then the organization is comprised of many systems that need to be interconnected, and there are implications of privacy. The room number is a really good one. Like that's very private information. Um, if I'm a celebrity, we really need to keep that secret. So some of the data might have different privacy implications than other parts of the data. Um, and so it seems like this is not the security here is so complex that it's more complex than the human's ability to actually like really oversee it. So what do we do in an IT environment when the complexity has really gotten so high that we don't have enough humans and the humans don't have the bandwidth to actually sort of regulate or govern this really complicated digital transformation that our company's undergone?
So I think you use the word govern. I think that's where it starts, right? Like that basic hygiene and the fundamental data governance. So just like, I was talking about before about fundamental identity management, there is also fundamental data governance. It is appalling how many systems are still out there unprotected. It is appalling how much personal data is just sitting inside a centralized honeypot where one or two employees in the company have the keys. And if they're compromised, all of the data is compromised. And I say that it's appalling, except that every single day there's another breach. And so it's like, why should it be appalling anymore? But it just is because it's just, it's just honestly, some of it is negligence, some of it is laziness, some of it is, it won't happen to me. My systems are fine. Some of it is, yeah, people are very busy and they don't have the budgets and so on and so forth. But just like there are plenty of companies that make environment or, career development a priority. There's no reason why this should not be a corporate priority, corporate responsibility, and a stated one. And I think, unfortunately, we're in such a crisis that I'm not really sure what it will take. Like, I just don't even understand how we got to this point when technologies and solutions exist. And I just wonder, like, are we going to have a 9/11 moment where somebody's going to step in and say, you know, the game is over? Like, you're going to have to change how you manage personal data. You're going to have to shore up the security and not dictated by fines. Like all of our, most, if not all, data protection laws are centered around fines or, announcing a data breach. They don't actually tell you what to do to prevent it. And that's also the problem, is that we work on check the box compliance and not on, real security. So it's not like the technology doesn't exist. It's not like you cannot create guardrails around the data protection. It's not like you can't have good data governance. It's that people are just complacent. It's just not happening.
Yeah, and I would agree with that assessment. The guest before Ashe, Alex Weinert from Semperis, for a long time Microsoft identity engineer, on the live stream that we recorded, he made an observation that the old stuff gets put in, and then new stuff comes in, but the old stuff never gets upgraded. So the old stuff continues to work. Then the new stuff comes in, and now you have something new, and then newer stuff will come in and something new. But you'll find that the old stuff never gets decommissioned. He said, there are still a lot of applications using Kerberos, which
Yeah.
is like the Microsoft security protocol from, I don't know, the 90s or the 80s. Um, and so I think that's why we're in the situation we're in. Having been in the IT and an IT professional for a long time, actually putting systems into production. Certainly, you found this at IDEMIA, is quite difficult. Operationalizing IT systems is difficult. And once they work, upgrading them is risky. If you have a plant that's making $1 million an hour and you want to do an upgrade on that plant, well, you're risking $1 million an hour that plant might be down. And so the risk from a risk management perspective, maybe it's insecure, but maybe the risk of fixing it is greater than the risk of it getting hacked from the board perspective.
Maybe. I mean, I was dealing with a customer and they really wanted to buy our stuff and they said, you know what, like to your point, half of our applications are still legacy. There's actually no way to add a second factor for authentication, even if we wanted to. And, you know, they're like, well, it was a bank. And they're like, well, the bank is not going to rip all of that stuff out just so that I could like put in stronger authentication. So I guess I'm just going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
And I say to that, what are you waiting for? Like, you know that it's not good. So why don't you rip this stuff out? And, even if it takes a few years, at least you'll know that, you're on a trajectory to secure and fortify all of your systems.
When I talk with companies, I try and sort of separate these two problems. There's the problem of legacy, like all that old stuff that we have, that we didn't upgrade. Um, and there, the challenge is operational leverage, right? Our worst case situation is every system we have is a one-off, right? And so what's happened is that these systems called PAMs, or privileged access management systems, have evolved, where a PAM system will say, well, I can do Active Directory, I can do PeopleSoft, I can do Siebel, and I can do Salesforce. So you used to have 4 one-offs. Now you have one new one-off, but that's better than having 4 one-offs. But no PAM system, it does it all. You might have a different PAM system for, let's say, Google and cloud native stuff and Amazon, right? And so I feel like that's one part of the equation, is how are we going to get operational leverage over the old stuff? But then the other part of the equation is, what about the new stuff? Now I'm building a new application, I'm building an agent, I want to build it right. What does right look like? And that's where I feel like we have to provide the architecture and guidance and principles, so that if we can't tell you how to properly design your application so that it's governable, we can't be surprised if you build it and it's not governable. And I feel like today we're not providing a vision for what a governable piece of software looks like. What are the best practices? How do we measure it? How do we make sure that it has the transparency and telemetry and auditability that we need in order to feed our compliance engines? Because compliance is still important. Even though compliance isn't enough, it's still important. It's still a checkbox that we need to check for regulatory reasons. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know. Does that help you sort of think about it, or and then if you think that's about right, what do you tell the developer who wants to do the right thing today?
I mean, I've always said you don't need to boil the ocean. You can start, just start, take the step forward, take the first step, and start building systems that are responsible by design, given the threat that we're facing. And yes, you don't need to deal with, I said the same thing to the customer, by the way. I said, just deal with the new stuff and, the legacy stuff you'll have to figure out separately. So I agree. Control what you can control, but
Right.
at least
Although,
you,
by the way, I don't think we should just leave the old stuff but to make our PAMs governable so they can make that connection to the last mile and hopefully transfer some of that good governanceable bet down. So PAMs still have a role to play here, but we just need better PAM systems. This is one of the reasons I like StrongDM is because, yes, it's a PAM, but at least it's governable with CEDAR policies, for example. So I think that not all PAMs are equal, but PAMs have a lot of business value in connecting some of that old stuff that can't be upgraded and at least giving us the ability to reason over what its current policies are. Sorry to interrupt.
no, I think that's a fair point. I guess the point I was trying to make is that we should just get started. And that legacy
Yeah.
stuff is complicated. And if you can at least, for example, secure the new applications, secure the help desk, that will go a long way. Instead of waiting until everything is perfect so that you can put all this, the thread through the needle through the thread. My analogy is not working. Yes. That you could thread the needle all the way through. Um, and I don't think that that's a requirement from day one. I think day one is take care of what is the low hanging fruit, which may be, again, it might just be your help desk. And you know what? The help desk is a very vulnerable point. Look at MGM. I mean, there's so many examples of the help desk being compromised. So that might be the starting point. It may not be the application layer. And for each company, it might be different, but just start.
Um, I think what you're alluding to also is that we need a more risk-oriented perspective. So the help desk is the highest risk. Forget the website where you can get the latest marketing deal. For worry about the help desk. But companies, identity-based systems, security systems, make it hard to actually figure out what are the risky capabilities of the organization. Um, do you
And
think
by the
that,
way, you could use AI for that. That's a good use
and
of AI to
yeah, so what are your
analyze
thoughts on,
traffic.
yeah, how do enterprises figure out what are the riskiest areas and what should they prioritize?
So for each enterprise, it will be different, but we know that there are specific points, right, that are particularly risky. So the help desk is one of them. Um, Anything related to new devices, new locations, anything around privileged access, for sure. Like there are definitely places that are higher risk than others. And then there are places that are lower, let's say, barrier to fixing. And I think that intersection between the two is where you begin.
Um, okay. So maybe we should just go to last thoughts. I think we've covered most of the topic I wanted to bring up. Maybe before we break, any last thoughts or takeaways or action items for guests or next thing the conferences you'll be attending coming up? Any of the above?
So I'll just mention that I'm co-producing the FinTech Security Summit on April 30th in New York, which is part of New York FinTech Week, and would be very, very excited to see any of your guests there. We have a great lineup, and of course, AI agents will be on the agenda, and we're going to talk about ways that AI agents can help grow and foster fintechs. And we're going to talk about how AI agents can be used to help protect and secure customers. And we will talk about the risks associated with them along the way.
Okay, and just a little bit of house cleaning to finish. So please follow us on LinkedIn if you're enjoying the show or at least finding it useful. We're trying to get to 2,000 followers, so please hit follow on LinkedIn. That helps us a lot. The live stream is sponsored by Glue. And next episode, we have a Gartner analyst, Eli Israel, will be joining us and talking about, a topic that we kind of alluded to today, but how do you catalyze authorization-aware developers? Because ultimately, if we need to say what right looks like, and we have to get developers to buy into it, because nothing happens unless that happens. So join us for the next episode. And with that, I will say, Francis, thank you so much for being on the live.
Thank you.
And thank you, audience.